We'll talk
What?
after the class.
Yes, okay, thank you. Ese è la prova, io mi have someone saying by the current.
Right, I get a chance to come back tomorrow. I just came the first time this week, so I don't have my schedule yet. Check with me tomorrow. Right?
Do you have an extra packet? Or just
So I was looking for it before I came up. Let me give you the sheet that I'm going to be using now, but the packet, we'll have to make a new packet. This is one sheet, the other sheet I'm going to give out there. So that's.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Welcome back, everybody. So we're going to continue where we left off in Pirkei Avos. And we were learning about the character trait of kas, which is anger.
This is downstairs. So he's going to.
And we were learning about what it says, how anger is compared to avodah zarah. And then we spoke about, practically speaking, what is the person supposed to do. It's not usually when you sit down and meditate, even if you meditate on what it says in Tanya, but at that moment, the person has a sort of an outburst and a sort of an explosion, and it's so intense and it's so upsetting that it's very hard to think and concentrate and allow those thoughts to really calm you down. So we said that the person needs to be able to be in control. It's very hard to control the emotions, but we can control our head. And the rule is that the mind controls the heart. And the mind is the key to the heart. So if something is very upsetting and is generating a lot of negative emotion, and a person feels that it's so strong that they are not able to handle it in a proper way, at that time, a person should learn to be able to dismiss, to be able to use the term, push it away with two hands. If you remember, we learned the piece in Tanya. So I want to continue a few more lines. Again, those that didn't get it, I still have a few more copies, so I'll hand them down. I'm talking about the sheet from Tanya. We were doing page 186. Hi, Rotem. It's good to see you in person.
Good to see you too, Rabbi Majeski.
Yeah. Actually, page 188, that's what we're going to go to. On this sheet, it says on top, Lessons in Tanya, chapter 12, page 188. So what we did last time was on page 188, the top line, where he said, immediately upon the thought rising to the mind, a person can't be in control of a negative thought that comes, but once he becomes aware of it, he thrusts it aside, pushes it away with both hands, and averts his mind from it. The instant he realizes that this is a negative thought, and he will refuse, this is the Beinoni, the person who's totally in control. He will refuse to accept it, even as a subject for mere conscious thought. He won't even think about it, just to spend time, certainly not entertain the notion of acting on it. Because a person who willingly indulges in negative thought, that makes a person a Rasha, according to Tanya. And a Beinoni, by the way, remember the word Rosh and Tanya doesn't mean what you think it means. But usually we use the word Rosh meaning a wicked, evil, terrible person, but that's not what the word Rosh means in Tanya. According to Tanya, the Russia is a certain level, and in fact, most people on planet Earth are one of the levels in the category of Russia, not Beinoni. What the Alter Rebbe refers to as a Beinoni, most people would refer to as a absolute tzaddik, someone who never ever did anything wrong in thought, in speech, in action, never ever doesn't happen. So therefore, a person who does willingly indulge in negative thoughts, that person is not a Beinoni. What I want to show you mainly is the bottom part, the line that begins with, so too in matters between man and his fellow man. That relates to Pirkei Avos. Just like when it comes to thoughts that go against Hashem, the Beinoni is a person who knows how to push it out of his head. He doesn't even allow himself to go there. He ignores it. So too, as soon as a person gets a feeling of animosity or hatred towards another person, page 189, or jealousy, or anger, or a grudge against another person, he will bar them from his mind and his will. He'll refuse to think about it. Remember, he'll dismiss it. On the contrary, his mind will prevail over and dominate the feelings of his heart to do the exact opposite of that which his heart desires. Now, this is something exceptional, but this is what it says in the Zohar, that if you're angry at somebody and you really feel you have hate to the other person, first of all, don't allow the thoughts of hate to entertain your mind. And secondly, go a step further to conduct yourself toward this person with a quality of kindness, the opposite of what you feel. Display towards this person a disappropriate love, a love which is out of proportion, and without being provoked into anger or take revenge, chas v'shalom. On the contrary, to repay the person with favors, like it says in the Zohar, we should learn from Yosef. Look what the brothers did to Yosef. They sold him, threw him into a pit. He ended up becoming a slave in Egypt. He was alien. He was hidden. He was taken away from his father, from his family for so many years. You can imagine what kind of hate he should feel towards them. So the Zohar says, what did Yosef do? Not only didn't know any hate, he went out of his way to show them that he forgives them, and this is all part of Hashem's plan. And he did everything he possibly can to make them feel comfortable and to make them feel loved, and that he's not against them, and so on and so forth. Okay, this is a level that's very hard to reach. But I want to get back to our question. There's all these things it talks about in Tanya, that jealousies, in Pirkei Avos, jealousy is a negative character trait, the feeling of revenge is negative character trait, anger is a negative character trait, but we're humans, and what do you do when you're feeling that way? So the answer is, whenever a person feels any of these feelings, especially in a very strong, intense way, at that moment, I should be able to train myself that I'm in control of my thoughts. I don't allow it to entertain my mind. And if I will dismiss it from my mind, it'll be dismissed from my heart. It doesn't correct the problem. There still may be something wrong, but at least I can work on myself not to allow my mind to think about it, and then my heart won't be burning with anger or other feelings that are similar. And you might say to me, but don't you have to sometimes work things out and just figure it out? Talk to a person, talk to a therapist, talk to that friend that hurt you, have a conversation. The answer is yes, but that conversation should be calm, intelligent, trying to improve things, not anger and not just destructive and just wild emotion. So the way to control things are to learn and say
Cool, that was
that the happiest people on the planet
yay, Moses Adventures.
Anybody know how to put
Those are
it?
mine. Okay, perfect.
Nope. Do you know how to mute?
I think everyone's muted. I don't know what's happening.
It's mute.
Yeah, okay,
I did it.
thank you.
No.
Very good. You muted me also?
What?
You muted me
No.
also? Okay, no, that's right.
Mm.
So when a person asks, what do you mean have Avos Yisrael for every person? How can you become that way? So the answer is, the first thing is we are able to do this at least on a level of thought, speech, and action. Means if I'm angry, don't do anything out of this anger. Don't hurt anybody. Don't scream at anybody. Don't break things. Don't slam doors, and don't throw shoes and everything else that goes along with it. Speech, control my mouth when I'm angry. Remember we said that it says in the Sefer, when a person gets angry, it's very helpful to just stop talking. Because as you talk, it generates more and more anger. So at the moment of the heat of the anger, stop talking. But definitely don't allow out of my mouth hateful words, cursing, or anything along those lines should come out as a result of anger. And that everybody's in control of. What we're not in control of is the way I feel. So even that we can control, that I don't allow those feelings to surface, because when they come very strong, I'm going to dismiss it. I'm going to push it away with two hands, think about something else, and not allow those thoughts to dominate my feelings. Okay. I think we'll move forward in the Pirkei Avos. So we're going to go to page 12 in the booklet. It's still the same Mishnah. And this Mishnah was the Mishnah that said that a person should be very careful in terms of respect for Torah scholars. And remember, it said like this: be close to them and benefit from their flame, but be careful because you might get burnt. We explained it last time that begashmius, in a physical way, fire is something which could be very beneficial. If you want to benefit from the light of a fire or the heat of a fire, you have to be close. If you stay far away, you won't be able to benefit from the light if it's nighttime. And if it's cold and you're far from the fire, you won't be able to warm up because the fire is too far away. On the other hand, yes, being close is good, but if you get too close, you can get burnt. So you have to be in a balanced way, not too far and not too close. The same applies to the great Torah scholars. On one hand, if you stay far away, you won't be able to benefit from the wisdom, from their guidance, from everything that they have to offer. So you have to be close. If you get too close, you might get burnt. What does that mean? Anyone remember or anyone know what does it mean if you get too close, you get burnt? How could you get burnt? So generally speaking, too close means in not a respectful way. Let's say the Beis HaMikdash. The Beis HaMikdash was the holiest place in the world, and it's a mitzvah to visit it very often. But there are many halachas how to conduct ourselves in the Beis HaMikdash in a respectful way. And some of those things, if a person violates, the punishment is very severe. And take, for example, this would be, I would say, the most extreme. The holiest place in the Beis HaMikdash was the Kodesh HaKadoshim. What happened if the person, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest who went in, when he went in, he did something wrong? What would happen to him? He passed away in the moment in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And that's because he did something wrong. But it's interesting, it didn't happen if he did it someplace else, only in the Holy of Holies. How does that make sense? It's the holiest place. So it should be a place that brings goodness and happiness and blessing. And specifically there, that's if a person does something wrong, immediately something happens to him. But the two things are connected. Because it's such a holy place, which means there's such a strong presence of Hashem, therefore the caution to be careful the way we act in such a place is much more necessary than any other place. There are a few analogies to this. I'll use one analogy in the human body. There's certain organs in the body that are considered vital organs, like the brain, the heart. The vital organs, you have to be extremely careful more than any other parts of the body. And if you take a needle and you scratch a finger, you'll see a white mark on your finger. Nothing is going to happen. Imagine if a person would take the same needle and make the same movement of a scratch on a heart during surgery, on the heart, God forbid.
Yeah.
It could be fatal. Why? Because it's a much more sensitive organ. You have to be much more careful and cautious with everything you do. So the brain, the heart, the liver, the blood, certain areas in the body, those are the areas that have to be extremely careful because it's so vital. In a certain sense, the same is also with Hashem's presence. The Beis Hamikdash, the Holy of Holies, because there's a greater presence of Hashem, then what I do matters much more. It's a very significant place, and therefore every little move that I make could make a huge difference. And the same is with the Torah scholar. The Torah scholar is a godly person, a person that has within him a presence of godliness and holiness. So therefore, on one hand, we want to be close. On the other hand, you can't be too casual and too friendly and to a point where it becomes disrespectful, because then you're disrespecting the Shekhinah that's there. I don't remember if I spoke about it in class or it was brought out when you did the Parsha, but a few weeks ago we had a Parsha which was Vayechi, and in that Parsha we find that Yaakov rebuked one of his sons, Ruvain, and he said, because you desecrated, those are the words in the Chumash, you desecrated my bed. He took the bed of Yaakov and took it from one place, moved it to another place. And Rashi adds that what it means, not desecrated the bed, you desecrated the one that descends on my bed, the Shekhinah. Rashi says that Yaakov was a great tzaddik, and not only was the Shekhinah present within him, it was also present within his room, in his house, in his bed. And therefore, when you do something to something like that, you're also doing something which desecrates Shekhinah. So in the Beis Hamikdash, if somebody would walk over and break the menorah, it wasn't just like breaking a menorah in my house. This is a menorah that's holy, that has a presence of godliness. And when you break that menorah, it's a whole different story, and the consequences are much more severe. So therefore, with tzaddikim, we have to be extremely cautious to be close and yet to stand at a respectful distance.
Which distance?
What is respectful distance?
From tzaddikim?
Right. The distance, I mean, a distance of respect, not, a distance of respect means the way I speak to the person, the way I address the person. For example, you don't call them by their first name. You don't interrupt them when they're in the middle of speaking. You don't say things you would say to someone else, like, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't mean any harm, but it's a way of speaking that when you're talking to someone that you have to respect, you have to be careful. Like there's a story in Gemara, just to give an example, that one of the greatest sages in Gemara, his name was Rabbi Yochanan. And if you ever heard or came up in class to learn about the fact that there are two Gemaras, there's a Talmud Bavli and a Talmud Yerushalmi. There's a Gemara that was written in Babylon, and there's a Gemara that was written in Israel called Talmud Yerushalmi. Rabbi Yochanan was the author of the entire Talmud Yerushalmi. So he once spoke about the Beis Hamikdash, which will be built through Mashiach. And he said that there'll be such diamonds there, they'll be huge. He described them like as huge as a window. And he based it on a pasuk, a verse. So there was a student sitting in the class, and he was thinking to himself, that's ridiculous. How could there be diamonds so big? You can't even find a diamond the size of an egg. You can find a diamond the size of a window. But of course, he didn't say anything. Then he was traveling and he stopped off at an island. And he saw malachim, he saw angels there, and they're carrying these huge diamonds. Obviously, if he saw angels, he wasn't an ordinary person himself. And then he asked the malachim, the angels, what are you doing here? What is happening with these diamonds? So he said, we're preparing this for the third Beis HaMikdash. He said, wow, what my Rebbe said was really true. And he came back to him and he said, Rebbe, I tell you, you should continue teaching Torah because what you say is really true. I saw it with my own eyes. But then something happened to him. Because what he actually said to his teacher was, I didn't believe you and I didn't trust you, but because I saw it with my own eyes, so I saw that you're right. So telling your teacher, not an ordinary teacher, like one of us, telling a person who was one of the sages, like Rabbi Yochanan, that I didn't really believe and trust what you said, that's disrespectful. It's too quiet. Any questions?
But we cannot speak with him.
You speak in a respectful way.
But we will not see.
In Torah, even in halacha, there are certain laws which are written down. This is considered disrespectful. We might not realize ourselves, but the Torah teaches us what's considered respectful, what's considered disrespectful. In the Chumash, there's a story of two sons of Aaron that they died when the Mishkan was built. Some of you may have learned the parsha last year. So one of the opinions of what they did wrong that this happened to them was that people came to Moshe Rabbeinu to ask a halacha question. And in the presence of Moshe, instead of Moshe answering, they jumped out and they gave the answer. And that's considered disrespectful. Disrespectful that when you're in front of your teacher, you don't go ahead and sort of override. They're supposed to be giving the answer, and you were disrespectful by jumping out ahead and giving the answer instead of them. So, yes, we need the Torah's guidance to know what's respectful, what's not respectful. But that's what it means when it says to keep a distance. And the same with the Beis HaMikdash. So the holier the place is, or the holier the person is, the more caution we need. There was once an incident that happened with someone, and this person had said something negative regarding something the Rebbe said, and then something happened to the person. And there was a chassid, one of the Chabad chassidim, made a comment that it happened because he was disrespectful to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe was very upset. And he gave a very sharp talk. But the content of the talk was, and he said, there's nothing that comes from my end except for goodness and kindness. Chas v'shalom, nobody will, God forbid, ever be hurt because they offended me or whatever, something like that. So, of course, that's the inyan of a tzaddik, that they don't care. They rather other person be happy and healthy. But from our end, we have to be extremely careful to respect anything that's holy. So therefore, there's a certain, even halachas about a Torah book, about a siddur, a chumash. I don't know if you learn about this in halacha. Could you put a chumash on top of a siddur, or do you put a siddur on top of a chumash? You did learn it? A chumash goes on top of the siddur. If you put a siddur on top of the chumash, it's disrespectful. Could you put a magazine that you're reading on top of a siddur? No, that's disrespectful. There's an order. Do you put it upside down? No, that's disrespectful. An English book, it doesn't matter if it's upside down, right side up, inside out. But a Torah book, you have to be careful that it's dealt with in a respectful way.
Is there like an order for like every room I have a bookshelf? I don't remember the order I have it on there, but I don't know if I don't think I followed anything. I have like the Tanya on the shelf.
No order in that sense. Only if putting it one on top of the other.
Yeah, no, they are. It's like a stack this way. So does it matter? Like
The books are laying on top of each other?
Yeah, it's like a very tiny shelf. That's all I have. And so like I think the Tanya I have like in the middle, the Shahana is on top. And then I don't remember which one I have on
The main thing you need to be concerned about is a Torah book,
the Torah.
which I mean the Chumash, the Tillim, Siddur, and Gemara. These are all books that are a higher level of respect to others.
Tehillim is on the top.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
But I keep my Chumash somewhere else because the shelf, because they would fit on the shelf. So then in that case, then the Tehillim.
Right. So that's what it means when it says here that there has to be a certain element of respect for anything that has holiness to it. And in this Mishnah, it's talking about the respect for a Torah scholar, meaning a person that is more than an ordinary regular yid, but someone that has the Shekhinah within him. So if you have the booklet open on page 12, we'll go through a few of the statements there that are related to this. The number one on the page, that's from the Mishnah, but number two is from another part of Pirkei Avos, where it says the reverence for your Rebbe is like the reverence to Hashem of heaven. In other words, the reason why there has to be such respect, number one, you should respect any person. Remember, we said the halach is every human being has to be respected. When we say you need to have respect for someone that's a tzaddik, it means an additional degree of respect. Just like I just said about the siddur, you have to respect the siddur. But a chumash, there's an additional degree of respect. By the way, what about a Torah scroll that you read from in the shul? That has a higher level of respect, even more than a chumash. So that's what we're saying. Not God forbid that other people you don't have to respect. And the reason is because a tzaddik is a person. What does it mean? The reverence for a rebbe is like the reverence to Hashem, because the tzaddik has the presence of Hashem in him. And these words are words from Rambam Maimonides. He writes like this: whoever doubts his rebbe is doubting. It's like doubting the Shekhinah. So this specifically refers to someone that has a relation with his personal rebbe, but it comes from the Chumash. That it says in the Chumash that the Jews didn't accept what Moshe told them. They were doubting what Moshe Rabbeinu had to say. And it says in Rashi, in Gemara, that those who doubted Moshe was equivalent to doubting Hashem. On the next piece, a person who argues with his Rebbe is like he's arguing with Hashem. I just heard somebody giving a big speech. The speech was about the subject which is the most controversial subject in the universe today, about vaccine, about this, about that. And the main point of the person's speech was, don't trust what anybody else says, make your own decision. But in bringing that out, they went through a whole list that this great tzaddik made mistakes, and Moshe Rabbeinu made mistakes, and that one made mistakes. You can't always trust them, but that's not really the Torah way. I mean, I'm not talking about the vaccine subject. I'm not going there. I'm talking about the subject of, do I trust tzaddikim? Or do I say, they don't always know the right thing. They're not always right. That's not true. And especially if it's my Rebbe. In other words, imagine there are two great tzaddikim, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. And Beis Shammai says you should conduct yourself a certain way. His students weren't allowed to argue against him. But if they're going to go his way, they're arguing against the other rabbi. That's not a problem because they're following Beis Hillel. So that's what it means. If you argue against your Rebbe in the desert, Moshe Rabbeinu was the Rebbe of all the Jews. And there's a halacha of a person who insults a Torah scholar to be excommunicated. These are all sources that there has to be a higher degree of respect for a tzaddik more than anyone else. There's a story. I'm not going to tell the whole story because we don't have the time, but at least just the main idea. The Alter Rebbe in his times had a issue with another Rebbe, or rather the other Rebbe had an issue with the Alter Rebbe. The other Rebbe's name was Baruch of Mezhebush. He was a great tzaddik. He was a grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, but he didn't agree with the Alter Rebbe about everything. And when he spoke about the Rebbe, Alter Rebbe, he called him the Litvak. Litvak means the one from Lithuania, because most of the Hasidic masters were from Poland, Ukraine, and the Alter Rebbe was one of the few that was from Lithuania. So one day, the Alter Rebbe came to visit a certain town. And Rabbi Baruch had a student that lived in that town, and he had a dilemma. He said, what do I do? If I go to his Farbrengen, I go to his gathering, and I honor him and give him respect, my Rebbe might be offended because my Rebbe and him are not sort of getting along. If I don't go, then I'm offending him. So what do I do? So he decided, I'll just leave town before he comes, and I'm not offending anybody. And that's what he did. He left town. But where do you go? You leave town. What? Now you're homeless. So he decided he'll go to his Rebbe. And he went to Rabbi Baruch. Came to Rabbi Baruch. And Rabbi Baruch asked him, how come you're here now? You're usually not here this time of the year. So he said, oh, the Litvak, the Lithuanian one, he came to our town, so I left. He thought it'd make his Rebbe happy. And he said to him, what did you say? And he didn't realize, he repeated again. The Lithuanian one, he came to our town. And he said, is that how you refer to this great tzaddik, the Alter Rebbe? And then he said something, which unfortunately, because of that, something negative happened to him.
Oh,
But
was
I would rather not go into the details.
because he offended a tzaddik.
Because he offended a tzaddik. And he said it also in the presence of another tzaddik. He meant to be God. We have a disagreement. It doesn't mean that I think he's just a nobody, chas v'shalom. It's a disagreement. So what we see from this is that it's a very serious thing. And like I said, even offending any human being is very serious. How much more so a tzaddik? And the greater the tzaddik, the greater the offense. So we have to remember the rule. Be as close as you can, but in a respectful distance. Okay, we'll stop here. You're very welcome. It is a pleasure to be back. So your question, I'm able to stay much longer, but the Hashem, even